On today's episode of the Unveil Podcast, I chat with Rob DuBois. I have to say, I was so incredibly moved by this conversation. You can read Rob's bio in the show notes, but suffice to say, Rob is a retired US Navy SEAL. He is also a speaker, author, actor, and security consultant, and he does something called red teaming, which we talk a lot about in today's episode. Rob began human performance coaching in 2006 following a 20-year career in intelligence operations. After decades solving complex challenges across continents and cultures, Rob has seen the best and the worst of us, and you can learn a lot from his experience. Rob has written 2 books, Powerful Peace and Navy SEALs Lessons on Peace from a Lifetime at War, and a second book, Total Self-Mastery, which is going to be released soon. I was speechless several times during this conversation. I was moved to tears, as you will see if you watch the YouTube version. This is a conversation about humanity in all of its colours, in its evils and its lights. It's also the story of one man and a nervous system that evolved through childhood into his career in, firstly, the NSA and then the SEAL teams. We don't go into too much depth about Rob's war experiences. However, we do touch on the natures of the trauma of our war veterans. I can't imagine having a better episode with a more stellar human being, and I really hope that you enjoy and learn a lot from this Unveil Podcast episode with Rob DuBois. And so today on the Unveil Podcast, I have the pleasure and the privilege of welcoming Rob DuBois.
Victoria, thank you so much. This is really a great conversation I know we're going to have because of the conversations we've had before this.
Exactly. And not only before this, as in you have interviewed me for your podcast, but just literally the 5 minutes that we've been talking where we've had more laughs. So there's a lot that we can unpack today. And I really just want to start with you just giving our listeners a flavor of who you are. And that is a long and complicated one, I know. And you can start wherever. You can start with the history or give us what you do today and how you serve today. And then we're going to go off and dive off into all of these origin stories over the course of this interview.
I love that approach. I'll give you what we call the 5 and 25 in the military. The 5 and 25, based on recent experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, are TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, that have been developed because of IEDs, roadside bombs, buried bombs. And 5 and 25 is, I think, probably the Army came up with it over the past 10, 15 years, but it was the idea that before you step out of your armored vehicle or your Humvee, you glance at the ring around you, closest to you at 5 meters. And immediately after scouring that for disturbed earth or wires exposed or something out of the ordinary because it's going to blow up, you scan 25 meters, so near and far. So the near and far for me, I would start with the recent years. My 5 meter is, today I'm the founder of Impact Actual. Impact Actual. I love to not have to explain this, but I will. Actual in the military means the authority. If you watch Platoon, you'll see the commander of a platoon of soldiers saying, he goes on the radio and says, this is Phoenix Actual. That means it's the commander, not just Phoenix, the radio operator guy, but the Phoenix commander, the captain, the major in charge. We chose the term Impact Actual because, first of all, it's got the 2 words act in it, the end of the first and the beginning of the second. We're the authority on impact. We focus on helping people evolve their whole person development to become better than they are, better versions, like you, better, a better version of what you are. Because as you and I have discussed, and I'm sure we will discuss today, there is so much potential in each person. Mm-hmm. The most humble, modest, self-effacing, even low self-esteem person, which is where I come from, can be helped to understand. I won't say taught, be helped to understand. Dude or babe, you got so much under the surface, and your self-limiting beliefs and behaviors are retarding your access to that. You can't see it. It's there. It doesn't change your nature that you're held back by self-limiting beliefs and behaviors. It's all there. But you can change the world. You can be the next Mother Teresa. You can be the next Einstein. The person that is inside of you to be revealed across your whole person development, the body, mind, heart, and soul. by recognizing, acknowledging, honoring those distinctions within ourselves, and understanding that I control nothing else in the world besides that self, body, mind, heart, and soul, and my done zone, my healthy boundaries. That is where the true potential can be released. And that's what I'm working on in my own life. And I help to do it with my impact coaches at Impact Actual, and our course online, the Impact Unchained course. And that's a quick once around the world for 5 meters and what we're doing today. Where did that come from? The 25 meters of my life are, I started out 56 years ago on a small planet called Port Henry, New York, a little village. Well, actually, I ended up in the village of New York, started out in California, but went off to the Navy to become a Navy SEAL and had a high aptitude for languages. And the Navy back then said, they have this weird test. It's called the DLAB, the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, DLAB. And I had scored the highest in that station's recruiting station in New York that they'd ever seen. They said, and it's because of the weird minds that are made for NSA, the National Security Agency. If anybody's seen a beautiful mind, that's the kind of thinking. It's like, is it crazy or is it genius? Not sure. Not sure where the line is. Russell Crowe did a great job with that. So my mind was really weird, potentially genius, and definitely crazy. And that D-Lab said, they said, we'll give you any language you want if you just agree to be an NSA linguist. And I said, sure, I'll do that for the Navy as long as I can still be a SEAL. And they said, you bet, sign here. Well, turns out, looking back 35 years, I realized that was a bait and switch because no, you can't be a SEAL and a linguist in the Navy. And they knew that when they asked me to sign, but I didn't. So I did sign, and I did go off to 10 years as a spook for NSA. I chose Russian. It was 1985, and James Bond was all the rage. In fact, I literally thought that when I went to the Navy to become a spy for NSA against the Soviets, counter-Soviet expert at the time, that I would be given a Walther PPK to have an ankle holster. I believed that. It didn't turn out to be true. A lot of things about the Navy didn't turn out to be true.
Didn't turn out to be true.
Didn't turn out to be true, or some variation on the truth I assumed, which is kind of like a paradigm for life, isn't it? I assumed it was going to be a certain way. So I went to the Navy, did 10 years as a spook, lived in Turkey, learned Turkish, did all that fun stuff, and became a flying spook out of Hawaii for a few years. And then I finally got my chance to go to the SEAL school, to BUDS, BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition /SEAL. I did that because by the time I'd been in the Navy almost 10 years, the man who was what we call the detailer, which is a person in a job specialty who tells people where to go. It's a senior enlisted person, and that person for the medics, the corpsmen, or the cooks, or the painters, whatever the person is in the Navy, there's a senior one of those in DC that says, thou shalt go here and thou shalt go there. And I said, Cliff, because he's a friend of mine, Cliff Lynn, from my earliest days in the Navy. I said, Cliff, I told you I was going to be a SEAL. And he'd always argued with me as my senior petty officer or sergeant back in the early days. He's like, you're a crazy bastard. There's nothing better than what we have. Being an NSA guy is so cool. And that's because that's what he believes. And I admire that. We talked about, and we will talk about design, personal design. We all have this way of being that is perfect. And what we do is we throw a lot of obstacles in our way, a lot of barriers, a lot of filters, a lot of layers on top of ourselves so we can't move and live freely. But I called him up and said, dude, you got to let me go. You got to let me try to go to BUDS. And he's like, all right, you crazy bastard, go try it. And we'll get you back anyway because you're going to fail. And I said, cool. And I never looked back. 10 years later, I'd done 10 years in the teams. And that was when I retired in 2006 from that. And I've been doing a lot of, I did build Impact Actual just shortly after that in different incarnations. At one point, it was called Rob DuBois Consulting. And I strongly recommend you never name anything Rob DuBois Consulting because nobody can spell it.
Well, I have that problem, like the spelling thing.
Absolutely,
We've just
the
been
weird
through that
sound.
thing. Yeah.
How do you make the sounds? It was. I thought it was brilliant at the time. I was like, Voyageur du Bois, which is a French term meaning the traveler of the woods, which is what I, as a kid in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, I grew up on the water, on the Saronaks, on the rivers, and I actually guided for a couple of seasons in summer times, taking client groups out on the water and the trails. And I thought we have this one canoe called the Voyageur, which is a distinctive French-Canadian trapper, hunter, fur gathering canoe, the Voyageur du Bois, called the Traveler of the Woods. And it had my name in it. I was like, Voyageur du Bois, I mean, of the woods, right? Rob of the Woods, Du Bois. So I said, I'll call my company Veau DuBois because it's a contraction of Voyageur Dubois.
And a contraction is always cool.
Yes, the contraction sucked bad. Even worse was the actual spelling. I named it Voyageur Dubois, and people read the word voyeur. And they said, why are you calling your company voyeur? That's really creepy. And I said, you don't understand.
The history for NSA.
Right. That's back to the code making and code breaking. And it all made sense to me.
Yeah.
But as you and I know, we've talked about this for small business owners, you got to make it make sense to the client and the prospective clients, not how cool my shit sounds to me. So that's where that
cool
came
to me.
from.
I'm vibing with the coolness of the origin.
Right on.
Story.
Contractions and codes and cool stuff and crazy NSA minds like Russell Crowe's. So that's where that came from. I went off and did Impact Actual in its new framing over the past few years, and I'm blessed to be able to use. I've done a lot of work with the government, with corporations in the security realm too. So I have a different, like there's two Robs. One is working with red teaming, which is security assurance, which is becoming the adversary. I can think like a terrorist because I've been trained to fight terrorists. I understand the intelligence and the tactical operational special operations world, all of the above dimensions of what terrorism is, so I can become a terrorist and attack U.S. bases, find the gaps, tell the commander closes it. I've done that for corporations, big money people, schools as well. And I love doing that. And I love to be able to, I won't go into too much detail on supporting the government, how I have or done, how I have done, but I love to do both. The whole person development stuff of Impact, we're all in on that, and also be able to support red teaming where those certain set of skills, to quote Liam Neeson, will be useful.
And I really want to double click on a few things you said as we kind of dig into your design and what led you to be doing this stuff, because I love the end point of people's stories and the work you do at Impact Actual, and we'll get into that in a bit of depth. But I love unveiling the origin stories. It's why all my companies are called something to do with unveiling and unconcealing, no matter how weirdly I spell them. And I really want to understand. So what was it new that even though your buddy was saying, we've got the greatest job in the NSA, like this is the thing, what was it inside of you that was like, no, being a Navy SEAL is the thing? And even though I've had to wait 10 years, it's still what I'm going to do.
That's such an important question. And it goes back to what we've talked about in other conversations about design. And as I was mentioning, we throw obstacles in our way, we throw layers on ourselves, or others have thrown layers on us when we were susceptible to learning those things. I have trauma. A huge part of your work is in helping people manage their experience in today's life based on the past, whether it was last year or 5 decades ago. And so it's a bit of a circuitous beginning to the answer. The long and short of it is I wanted to be tested and I wanted to be perfected or refined. I wanted to be the best version of myself I could be. I wanted to be a badass. In fact, the way I learned about Navy SEALs was I went to 3 recruiters back in 1985 and said, who's got the toughest commandos? And I'd seen John Wayne and the Green Berets movie, and I knew that existed. My father was actually during the Vietnam time frame. He was recruited by the Special Forces. They said, "We need you, dude," because he's one of these super specimens, like a super academic, super physical guy, just a scholar athlete. And he said, "No," because he had me. He had a new son, brand new baby, and he said, "I can't do that. I'll go to the Army." Because he wanted to volunteer, he wanted to control his destiny, and the draft wasn't the way to do that. So he chose to go to the Army, but he also became a linguist, that's actually how I learned about them in the first place. The NSA spies. He became a Chinese linguist back in Vietnam and was in some sketchy areas, and it was a scary time for the family. In fact, where we were in Okinawa, one of his favorite stories about that, to drive home how serious our situation was if the Chinese or another major power invaded Japan, Okinawa, in resistance to the American presence in Vietnam, he would have been evacuated before me and my mother. They were that important to the war effort, and the women and children had to wait while they got the spies out. So I learned about it through that, and I And I wanted to follow in those footsteps as well. But I wanted to be tested like the rite of passage. My experience growing up was to watch A Man Called Horse, which is, it's a historical fiction. A white guy captured by Native Americans in the U.S. and they're going to kill him, but they just make him a slave instead, enslave him to work around the camp, and somebody's got to carry the water, and so they got him, but he becomes, through the standard heroic archetype narrative arc. He becomes admired because he's an ethical stand-up guy. He may not look like us, but he saved a couple of women when the enemies came into the camp, and so that kind of stuff. Standard heroic arc stuff. It's a Batman story or a Conan the Barbarian story.
Mm-hmm.
But he's admired by the Braves, and they're like, you know what? You get a chance. A chance. Mm-hmm. We're not going to guarantee you get to be one of us, but we're going to give you a chance to join us and be one of the tribe. And the way they did it was they took a knife and sliced 4 vertical slits in his chest and his pectoral muscles, about half an inch or an inch apart, 2 sets of paired slices. And under that, like when dads are always putting together the Christmas toys at 2 a.m. on December 25th, like I was doing till 4 a.m. in many cases because I couldn't get tab A to go in slot B.
Yes,
they do that. They take that. They do that to the men. They take a piece of wood, a little stick, and shove it under the tab of skin, and then they tie leather to it on both left and right pecs, and then they tie that to a hole in the ceiling and string him up, dangle him. That I'm not sure that's historically accurate, but I have read in my studies of Native American traditions about the sun dance, which takes a similar approach, tying those the 10-foot leather thongs on the man's chest to a pole. The young men who want to be, the young boys who want to be men, they want to be acknowledged as men, and they have to dance while staring at the sun. That's why it's called the sun dance. They dance up, touch this pole and run back. And if it doesn't tear through, they dance up, touch the pole and run back. And the goal is to tear the skin. You have to rip it out, rip out those little sticks. And it takes a long time because it hurts a lot. So like anybody else, a young 12, 13, 14-year-old man is trying really hard to be aggressive about it, but we kind of wuss out a little bit, like, let me not run quite so hard. But eventually the pain, as my life of pain and your life of pain, becomes so intense. You say, what's the rating of your podcast for words?
Oh, we're fine. Yeah, whatever.
They'll say, fuck it, and go. And that's where they become the man. They say, fuck it, run with all their might, tear the skin, and the tribe gathers around. That moves me so much to think about it. A friend, a Maasai friend of mine in Tanzania, had a similar situation at 15 years of age. It's forbidden by the government. The Tanzanian government says this is illegal. You can't do this. You have to stop doing this in the tribes, in the villages. And people like James, my friend, Kivuyo, will do it again. And not again. He said, I'll never do that again. But their rite of passage was a public circumcision. Standing, all the 15-year-old boys standing around in front of the whole village, and the guy with the knife comes around and goes snip, snip, slice, and you don't flinch. If you flinch, you're marked forever. You're not going to be a man. There's one chance. This is pass fail. And so they all stand there, and they all take it. Kind of like my black belt test when I got kicked in the groin 3 times and couldn't fall down. Wasn't allowed to fall down. But these rites of passage are, although these are extreme examples, and they're obviously brutal, and obviously they could be considered archaic, there's another example from SEAL training, from BUDS, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training. In our 5th week, in my generation, and sometimes the 3rd week, sometimes the 6th, there's a week called Hell Week. And Hell Week is called barbarism by the uninitiated, the unindoctrinated, those who sit outside in Congress or the public forum and talk about it on social media like, oh, it's barbaric. It's just hazing. It's not hazing. Or it is hazing, but in a purposeful way. Hell Week is 5 days of no sleep. Don't stop except to eat food. And we just go and go and go. We carry each other. We become delusional. We carry rafts. We carry logs. We go swimming for miles. We go over the sand. We go under the sand. We just go and go and go in very, very harsh conditions. And typically another that, like I said, it's about a month or so into training. We've already lost well over half the people in the team, in the class. My class was 142 to start. And I guess we started Hell Week. No. My class in 1995 was 142 started. And this is after having very careful selection just to get to buds.
Sure. It's not
color blindness, legal
not like just
reviews.
sign up.
Does your commander authorize you? Are you a good guy? Should you try have the chance to try? So we started with 142, which is probably about 1/10 of those who thought they would be a SEAL when they joined the Navy. Out of the 1,000, we had 142. Then we had 89 on day one of buds. So there's a warm-up week or two called third phase or fourth phase, jokingly called fourth phase of the 3 phases of buds. So the fourth phase is the preparation, and we lost from 142 to 89. And then we started training. And the 89 men that went into the training we got 42 going into Hell Week. So about 40, about 100 people have been lost in the first month. And then we lost a whole bunch. But I recall that 15 of us survived Hell Week together, and 28 graduated from that class out of 142. So the Hell Week is as far as I know, every SEAL in the world is in agreement on this. Every real SEAL, every man who's become a SEAL says Hell Week must always be there, because you have to have that winnowing. You have to have the sorting when a guy will not stop. I took the attitude they'd have to kill me to get me out of there. I knew they wouldn't. I knew the measures were in place to make sure we survived as much as possible. Bud still kills a guy every 5 or 10 years, but it's incredibly arduous conditions. But it's not a regular threat. We're not really under threat of death. It's just really, really, really hard, and you have to be committed with every cell. So that was my reason for going, was to be tested that way for myself, to see what could I hack. The other was to be refined, because as I saw it, a person has this design and can become a florist or a librarian or a nurse or a SEAL, and should. But not everybody. I shouldn't be a librarian. I'd be bored out of my wits. I love books, but not to be in that quiet environment. I want to talk about stuff. So that design is what we should follow, and it requires an incredible amount of discovery. What is my design? We have a lot of disordered beliefs about ourselves. And I would have thought I was garbage to be tossed out on the refuse pile in my earliest decades, not just years, but decades of my life. In fact, it was only a few years ago that I really began to deal with things, even though I've been sober for many decades by now. I had been doing my own path of healing and growth over 30 years of sobriety and being clean and sober. But there was still a lot of buried stuff that I had to get into actual therapy with and actually untangle and realize where I was doing things to hold myself back. So I wanted to be tested, and I wanted to be refined in the path of my design, so I can make the biggest difference in the world.
I think it's interesting as a completely, I'm not exactly uneducated, but I'm hardly a Navy SEAL kind of person. But from this outside perspective of just appreciating the idea of how the human being is formed and then is shaped over a lifetime. When I look at the kind of Navy SEAL stuff and the Hell Week training, etc., I kind of fall down on your side. Like, I see it as necessary because of the end goal. And when I look at everything, I look at things from first principles in terms of what is the purpose of this actually doing? What is the influence of this chosen practice on the nervous system of the individual? And therefore, what is the net result going to be? And I see the people who kind of are attracted to being the toughest of the tough and this elite squad. And I see the themes of, belongingness, brotherhood, that essence of once a SEAL, always a SEAL. It's a tight-knit bunch of brothers who would do anything for one another. And that's a huge draw, and like a family that maybe was never there as the family of origin. But I also see the self-worth thing coming from, I've proven myself in the hardest of circumstances.
Now I'm okay.
Out. Now I'm a good person because I can survive Hell Week. And that's interesting from a kind of like underlying motivation perspective.
Absolutely.
But as soon as you step into, okay, so we're now in buds, we're now doing the thing. It's almost like I segment all of my thought processes about what's right for a human being and those kind of motivations going into it. And I'm very much, hang on a second, I want the people who are going to be in the Navy SEALs to be able to survive Hell Week. I literally do. I might have all of my judgments from the perspective of, hang on a second, what are we doing to these gentlemen's nervous systems? And is it really appropriate to completely stress them so extensively from a human perspective? No. From a fighting troop of this is what they're actually then going to be asked to do with their physiology and how they're going to be asked to use their nervous system in a very specific way to do the job of being a Navy SEAL. I absolutely want you to have gone through Hell Week, because I need to know that that's kind of innate within you or trained within you as a capacity. And I look at that training and think, I can see exactly why those things are there. I can really understand why we want you to still be able to make at least some semblance of a decision on 5 nights of no sleep and relentless physical exercise and all. I still want you to be thinking at least semi-razor sharply. I don't care if you're in survival mode. I kind of want you to be, but also
right.
I still need you to be able to make a call or a judgment call at the 11th hour on the end of no sleep, etc., because that's the situation you're going to end up with in the field.
Exactly. We were told at the end of Buds. I wasn't told. I was in the line checking out. This is the last week of Buds. We're going to make it. We know at this point I'm going to graduate, but they're still telling us over these 7 months, in the unlikely event that you graduate this program, and that's every single day. We're told that many times by every instructor. In the unlikely event that you graduate this program, it's a constant winnowing, like I said, to constant testing, constant undermining, dragging down, testing the man's resolve. And it's because, as I heard an instructor say to a friend of mine in my class, while we're turning in our boots at the end, approaching the final graduation day, I heard this one instructor walking along, because by this time they're treating us as fellow SEALs. Yeah. We're not going to be SEALs yet, because there's still another 6 months of probation in my generation to go at your team. Or now it's been improved, it's been refined to the graduates of BUDS, the basic underwater demolition SEAL training, now have 6 months of advanced training that they do together. So it's a year plus of training. Yeah. And so they're going to sniper school, free fall school, comms school for radio work, and so forth. They're doing all that together. And so they do get to have their trident at the end of the year. So it ends up being the same. But in our case, it was much more subjective. You'd go to your team and be smelled by all the old dogs, and they'd say, this guy doesn't measure up. And they'd find a way to get rid of you before you got your trident in that probation period. This guy is not what we want to have in the team. This guy has low. Now, you have to make certain moral compromises to be war ready. Yeah. There are difficult choices that can never be easily made. Look at Platoon. Look at My Lai, the My Lai massacre. There's a movie with Sean Penn about that. And Sean Penn and Michael J. Fox. I forget the name of it, but it was about the My Lai massacre. And Sean Penn's the bad guy. And Michael J. Fox is the good guy who's protesting us. And we're not going to massacre innocent people. I'm not by any means on Sean Penn's side, the bad guy's side, in massacring innocents. But there are very difficult choices that are faced in real wars. And those have to be made from a position of some strength of character. You have to say, I'm doing this shitty thing for a better reason, for a good reason. Like you said, when I'm exhausted, I'm drained, I'm depleted to near zero, I'm on fumes. What decisions will I make? Friends of mine were killed in Afghanistan. In the movie and the book you'll hear called Lone Survivor by Marcus Luttrell. He was a platoon mate of mine, a teammate of mine at SDV Team ONE in Hawaii. And Mike Murphy was a buddy of mine. He was the young lieutenant in charge of that spec recon squad. I was leading those same platoons before I left the team to go back to DC to wrap up my career for 3 years, to become a red teamer, a terrorist. So when I learned about Mike and the boys being killed, it was very impactful for me. I had survivor's remorse, survivor's guilt, because, what if I'd been on that mountainside instead of Mike? Yeah. This goes to the decision-making process. And I'm not judging Mike's decision or the boys that were with him, including Marcus. Not judging Dan Healy and the boys who ran to their aid and the Chinook that was shot down. The decisions are life-changing or life-ending in some cases.
Yeah.
In this, I've never watched the movie. I was invited to watch the movie, but I'm like, dude, seriously, I want to watch the police traffic cam of my family being killed in the minivan. Why would I watch that depiction of their deaths? But my understanding is that they encountered a shepherd or two, and they had to decide: let the shepherd go or don't let the shepherd go. Will this person compromise us to the Taliban, which did happen apparently, and then Taliban swarmed them, and that's why all but Marcus were killed. But those sorts of decisions are hard enough when you're lucid, when you're not exhausted, when you're not fatigued and wiped out. And so I heard this instructor tell a buddy of mine, he's like, if everybody knew how good it is to be a SEAL, nobody would ever quit. And I heard that and I said, wow, okay, I'm glad I heard that. And I'm glad I heard it while I was checking out, turning my boots in, because I did keep going. I am one of the 15 original members of this 142-person class that did keep going. And another thing I was told that was very profound by another instructor in a classroom environment during that same week or two was the counterpoint. But this is where we get into paradox. They're both true. Things can be true together.
Yeah.
And so one guy said, nobody would ever quit. That was profound. No, wait, those 7 months I just went through, nobody would ever quit that because being a SEAL is so awesome. And I won't say cool, like it's cool to be a cool guy. I don't give a shit about that. I really don't give. Some of the young guys do. They're like, yeah, image. Yeah, chicks are into me, whatever. I don't care what people think of me for being a SEAL. I would, as you've told me, you would be happy to be unemployed if it meant all people were mentally and emotionally healthy. I said repeatedly during my career, I would be happy to be a street sweeper if it meant there was nobody harming innocents.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen in the human species. There's always going to be a need for mental, emotional, and tactically ready responders. But this other guy, one of our instructors, said, when you get out there to your teams now, because they were finally accepting us as members of the teams, we'd be assigned to our teams. He said, you will be colder, you will be more tired, and you will be in more pain than you've ever seen in buds. And I said, bullshit. And I was wrong.
You were wrong.
Yes. And that's why Hell Week exists. And that's why buds exist. Because you will be colder and more tired and more in more pain than buds, which is almost incomprehensible. But it's out there waiting for us.
And I think as well, what I'm hearing from the kind of the way that buds and all of the SEALs are trained sounds inhumane. Like to literally live with this constant narrative of, in the unlikely event that you're going to get accepted into this, it's almost like ensuring that the final tribe of brothers is not only committed to, oh yay, we finally got it, but you've put so much into being there that you're going to stick it out. You're going to be there and you're going to invest everything you have. It's almost like using the sunk cost fallacy against you. It's like you put so much into this, like you're going to keep going. And that sounds, from a humanistic perspective, we might look at it and think, this seems a little bit unfair. But actually, when you look at the actual use of the SEALs as the end result, it's almost been designed perfectly. And yet I see some of these guerrilla type tactics, the keeping people up till they're fatigued, keeping people undernourished, making people really stretched and stressed, etc., used in the personal development world. And it's interesting.
Which is misplaced.
It's incredibly misplaced because the massive revelations or the commitment to that tribe of people becomes exactly not exactly because it's not exactly Hell Week, but similar to that vibration of, these experiences we've shared together within personal development. And yet these are not real. This is an energetic extreme that we're pushing people to, which is great for Navy SEALs because it's necessary. But in personal development, I think you've spoken to it. I certainly speak to it. It's not about how much can we stress ourselves to be something else. It's how much can we allow ourselves to be innately us and find our uniqueness and our design and allow that to be an emanation.
Well, it's so popular to say Navy SEAL. It's so popular to say Navy SEAL physical fitness program or Navy SEAL success program or Navy SEAL leadership program. Like my friend Brian Losey, Admiral Brian Losey, who was he was one of the WARCOMs, which is the top SEAL in the Navy. He's as Admiral Brian Losey, he was the Special Warfare Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command commander. And as Warcom, he led all the SEALs, made all the decisions for all the commanders of all the teams, and said, "Thou shalt this and thou shalt that."
Mm.
And he and I were talking about Powerful Peace, my book, Powerful Peace: A Navy SEAL's Lessons on Peace from a Lifetime at War. And his own comment about me is on the front of it. Brian flew up from he was running SEAL Team 6 at the time, back in 2006 when I retired, and he flew up from Dam Neck, Virginia to DC to attend my graduation from the Navy, my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't want to speak. Again, a quiet professional. He
Mm.
wanted to just be present to honor me in his fancy white uniform with all the gold stripes on the shoulders. And he said, "I'm here for you, Rob. This is about you today." And I said, yeah, I got it, whatever. And he sat down. I sat him with my parents. And then, needless to say, I betrayed his trust. And I said, "I'd like to introduce my guest speaker for today." Right when I got the microphone, it was he's like, he took it in stride, guys ribbing each other, basically. He said, "Okay, fine." He got up, he took the mic. And his opening lines, Brian's got the best one-liners ever. He said, "You folks here in DC know Rob DuBois, the velvet glove. I want to tell you about the iron fist inside that glove." Now, you will never hear a better phrase for the man's heart, to awaken a warrior's heart than that exact phrase. It just hit me like a 2x4 in the head. And years later, I said, "Hey, can I use that quote on the cover of Powerful Peace?" So Tony Robbins, Fran Townsend, who was the national security advisor for George Bush, other major principals of Tony Robbins' League got the back of the book, and Brian got the front, because that's so important. That he summarized what it means to be a servant, a sacrificial servant, as we perceive it. And as you said, it's inhumane. The Buds is inhumane. Hell Week is definitely inhumane, and it's indecent in terms of kindness and gentleness and being a good human with other humans. However, it's an essential investment. And that's the way I look at these things that seem so discordant from what I preach. Be kind, be gentle to yourself. Sure. One of the things I had learned was to be gentle to myself.
Yeah.
And that was Buds is not kind, and Hell Week is definitely not kind. But as you said, in order to be fully prepared, properly prepared, we have to make certain sacrifices. And in that case, I sacrificed. I still can't feel the left side of one of my knees because of the war criminal position I was put in during prisoner of war school. I sat for so many hours that I got nerve damage. I have my whole body is one big injury from my SEAL life. Pieces were broken and bent and twisted, and I had a really interesting fun boo-boo with several of my ribs were twisted in position. Imagine you put a pencil on a table, that's where it connects to the spine, and then twist it, rotate it around. They were in the right place in my body, but they were twisted from a bad parachute landing. Scars galore, and physical therapy and rehabilitation. In recent years, I've been going back and dealing with these consequences that I invested in. And I wouldn't change one of the events that I was involved in with these very injurious near-death experiences. I wouldn't change any of it, because it's all compounding to the moment I'm in now. It's all essential to make me what I am.
And when you look at the impact of being a SEAL, I understand that you wouldn't change a second of it. What would you say are the essential ingredients that it gave you from the moment you left, or over time since you left? Like, what are the pieces that you got from being a SEAL that have influenced how you show up today in Impact Actual?
Absolute commitment. We have a model we follow called the 12 tasks. They focus on the body, mind, heart, and soul. In fact, I love, as an old NSA guy, I'm going to have to love my alliteration, right? So we have the 5 powers: our body, mind, heart, soul, and done. So the second through 6th of these tasks are: build your body, mold your mind, heal your heart, search your soul, and declare you're done. This far and no farther kind of thing, like a Gandalf. This far and no farther. I will not tolerate this in my life. I'm not being abusive to others. I'm not being a dick to others. In fact, my forward philosophy on life is don't be a dick. Sure. Because being a dick is a conscious choice that causes me stress and causes me loss. And I'm not willing to do that to myself. It's nice to be nice, but it's also practical. And so we focus on these 12 tasks of how to make oneself to refine oneself, to make oneself you better. It starts with commitment. Commit to growth. That's the beginning. And being a SEAL, becoming a SEAL taught me commitment, refined my commitment. Obviously, you can't go into SEAL training without some level of commitment, pretty high level of commitment. But coming out at the other end means you stuck with that. And I actually had Tom Petty in my head singing when I was being tortured or torturing myself. That's the funny thing. It's a voluntary program, and they keep reminding us of that too. This program isn't for everyone, gents. Yes, exactly. You can de-volunteer whenever you want. We've got warm blankets and cocoa in that truck over there. And then we're sitting there jackhammering with freezing in the surf zone and in the 50-degree water in January in San Diego. And they say there's warm, fuzzy blankets, and we have hot cocoa with little marshmallows right there in the van. All you got to do is de-volunteer. And many did, and I didn't. But I should have lost my train of thought there.
Well, commitment is where you were there.
All the way. That's why I always say commit to growth. And as you and I have discussed, it's about growth, which, as you've said, is about aging, misperceived as aging and declining. But growth is not declining. Growth is expanding in all forms. Even if my body, they say that a man's body attrits 1.5% body mass, muscle mass, every year after 30 or 40, whatever the number is. There's a specific physiological fact that exists. Now, can I continue to maintain muscle mass with, intelligently increasing my protein intake and lifting? Yes. There are some incredibly fit men at 60 and 70. And they have Instagram accounts, but that's not my jam. I'm not here to show you my six pack. I'm here to show you a greater way to live your whole life. And if that includes a six pack for you, so be it. But the commitment is everything. And the readiness to be all in. Real commitment means you're all in. There's a full investment of oneself. And Tom Petty was singing in my head, I won't back down. I'm going to stand my ground. That's what I said. You're going to have to kill me. In my head, while I was torturing myself in Buds, at their instruction, I said, I'm not going to back down. You'll have to kill me to get me out of here. And that was the commitment that has led to so many breakthroughs for me personally. The belief in oneself. Confidence follows commitment. Understanding, hey, I have confidence now because I stuck with that. And we need to prove that to ourselves. And I want everyone you are and what you are right now is perfect for today at this minute. Acknowledge that. Love yourself. Recognize it. Be gentle. Be kind. And if you're not happy with what you have, then change it. And that's why I love my little phrases. I call them the impact rules. The impact rule of AANS, AANS, hashtag AANS, kind of like Hans and Franz, is always accept, never settle. And in sobriety, I've learned that acceptance is the answer to all my problems, because when I find myself unwilling to accept some fact in my circumstances, this person that won't stop talking to me, or this ache in my leg that won't stop, whatever I refuse to accept of a reality around me is self-harm. It's a silly thing. I'm putting more stress on myself to say that I prefer not to believe that thing exists. Well, it exists. Accept it. But don't settle for things that are not acceptable to you. Like the most easy examples I can offer is my height and my weight. My height is fixed. I'm not going to change it except by some radical procedure or an amputation. My height is what my height is. My weight is completely under my control. So I will always accept my height. I will never settle for an unsatisfactory weight or physical condition for myself.
Sure. And I love that we're talking about the positives that have come out of all of this, and the kind of mantras that you have now, and the wisdom it's given you, and all of those sorts of things. I do want to touch on the negative side. And I know that's not possibly what people want to hear, but I actually want to understand how you feel your life has been affected by your experience, whether that's just within the SEALs, the training, the prior experience, the decade in the NSA must have been huge, where you're, infiltrating other things and observing other things. There's just so much in this, which I'm interested in. Your own nervous system's development is kind of where my question's coming from. It's like the origin story of, you mentioned trauma, and you absolutely do not need to go into any detail, but there's clearly a genesis story that gets to, okay, then we're putting our whole vehicle through extreme stress. And I'm kind of wondering, since your retirement, what have you had to unpack? What have you had to look at? What have you had to assess once you're out of that extreme, that's kind of been something that's been challenging or difficult? Or just what's your journey been like?
There's a fact within the SEAL teams and the Green Berets and the Force Recon and the combat controllers of the Air Force and any other elite unit and less than elite or conventional forces as well, to a lesser degree, that I will endure anything to stay in the mission. That goes back to the commitment. And as I mentioned, I have in recent couple years really dived deep on my boo-boos, my dents and scrapes, the stuff that my body has endured. And as Dr. John, my favorite chiropractor, likes to talk about, we've had him on Beyond Your Limits with Rob DuBois a couple of times. A chiropractor understands better than many physicians that there is a connectedness. The mind, the emotional life, and the body are all one thing. And the nervous system, how the energy flows, all these things can be acknowledged and addressed and be more effective than just popping the most recent pill that the doctor was inspired by a golf trip to prescribe.
Yes.
And so I broke myself in many, many, many ways in the teams. I mentioned the twisted ribs. Funny thing is, I've never had a broken bone. When I watched Unbreakable, Shyamalan's movie with Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis didn't die from a train crash, and he didn't die from a car crash, and he didn't die, and he's trying to figure out what the hell he is. I said, that's what I've got.
That's me.
And that's, yeah, exactly. It's very, very strange. So many impacts. I bounced on the runway one time so hard that Bobby Halsell, God bless him, he's rest in peace. He's a late SEAL, was our medic on the scene for a jump one day. I ran with the wind, it's called. And running with the wind is a bad idea for parachutists because parachutes have a forward motion. You might be running 7 or 8 or 10 knots forward because of the way it's shaped to move you forward so that you're landing forward, ideally. And so you want to fly into the wind. You have a 10-knot wind and you're flying forward at 10 knots. You're even. You're going to settle lightly to the ground, theoretically. But when you're an inexperienced jumper like I was on this fateful day in 1996, or no, I guess it was 7 or 8, I had a bunch of bad landings. I'm kind of famous for my bad landings, but being tough as hell. And I don't know why, it just is. And I ran with the wind because I thought I was going to impale myself on a windsock on this runway. I saw this 10-foot pole, and I thought,
no, thank you.
Yeah, I don't want that. So I'll take this instead. I jerked hard on my toggle. I turned right, and I ended up running with the wind over the asphalt runway. And I came in like there's a Steve, what was his name? The $6 Million Man was a cool episode, cool series in the U.S. And it always started with a bit of, it was a stunt man. No, he's a test fighter pilot guy. And he burned in. He had a bad jet fighter crash. And it shows his plane is real footage of an actual fighter jet crashing to earth and tumbling and burning and flames flying out. And it does these cartwheels and finally comes to rest. My body did that. My body, because I didn't have a plane around me. It was just my body hitting the runway, going bouncy, 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 bouncy. In fact, on my ProTech helmet, which I have somewhere in my little box of treasures, there's a spiral scar from when I did a head spin, kind of like a dancer.
Like you were breakdancing.
I did a nice little breakdancing head spin on the runway during my flipping and bouncing, and I came to rest on my back. Now, what Bobby knew back in the pickup truck he was using for ambulance, and what I knew were two different things. He saw this catastrophic, fatal, very likely fatal, but certainly severely injurious event. I only knew I had a lot of pain, a lot of drama, saw the world flying around me in different ways. Now I'm still. So I lay there, conscious, and I did a quick systems check. Mentally looking at the sky, I ran my mind through my body. I said, okay, where's the pain? Well, the pain's everywhere, so that simplifies the problem. And so I said, well, I can't identify a particular bad pain, like one, limb is twisted the wrong direction. So let me go ahead and take a look. So I sat up, and you can actually imagine like a Mel Brooks movie with his Frankenstein creature sitting up. I sat up like Frankenstein and looked down at my arms and my legs, and they were all in the right direction. And I said, oh, that's pleasant. So I stood up, and meanwhile, Bobby's racing across the field with the pickup ambulance because he had just told his corpsman, his junior corpsman, probably Nate, I can't remember who it was. He said, he quoted himself later. He told me, I told Nate he ain't getting up from that. Because this is the guy who's seen every possible injury and wound a SEAL can get.
Yeah.
And he's like, that dude ain't getting up. And next thing you know, this dude's sitting up and then standing up and then running back to the truck to get another parachute.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I ran back to the truck and I gave my parachute to the sky god, Jim Wood, who is still a sky god, probably 80,000 jumps now.
Wow.
And he was watching me with these great big dinner saucer eyes, like as I ran up, and he's like, and he said, before I could even say, here's my chute, he said, you are one tough motherfucker. Because he'd seen every possible injury parachute's going to get. So between Bobby flying up in the truck and Jim staring at me, I realized, okay, this was a weird event. Do I have a lot of pain? God, yes, I have a lot of pain. I had bruised my hip on that or another landing. Twisted my neck another time. I had a herniation on a disc in my spine in my C6-7. They had to cut it open and take that out and put in bone from my hip. So all these pieces have been repaired over the years. But the reason I'm going through all these little anecdotes is because all of it was what I chose to keep doing so I could keep doing the work. Because nobody wants to get downed. Nobody wants to get grounded. My first parachute landing had parachute school at jump school in Fort Benning back in 96. Snapped my ankle and lied about it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it wasn't a proper,
it
wasn't a shattering. It was a bad sprain. So I landed on it. I felt it and I heard it go pop, and I fell to the ground. As you do, you land. And then I got up and put my weight on it to see if it would collapse, if it was actually fully mechanically compromised or just very, very painful. It turned out to be just very, very painful. So I pretended not to be injured, gathered up my chute, and ran back to the truck to get another chute, which is what a lot of SEALs do. We lie about our injuries. Now that extends far beyond the physical. Far beyond, which is why we have so many suicides. 2 of my SEAL brothers of my generation have had their SEAL sons kill themselves.
Oh, wow.
TBI, PTS, invisible wounds, and other friends of mine have killed themselves. And so I see PTS therapy and PTS acknowledgement as being life and death. The bullets aren't flying at you anymore, except the one from under your chin. So I take my own recovery very, very seriously. Not because of suicide. I've been suicidal. I almost dismiss that as irrelevant because it happened. I was there, and now I'm not there. I do still carry a death wish, though. I think it's important to be aware of that. As I've tried to understand, just like I did, it took me a while to figure out why I didn't want to watch Lone Survivor. I was invited to all these premieres. I was a prominent SEAL in DC. I was invited to the DC premiere and to the Richmond, Virginia premiere, and very, very influential people were inviting me, like, hey, we want to make you a guest of honor, have you up here and see this film for the first showing. I declined and declined and declined. I said, I don't know why. Am I being a little bitch boy here? Why don't I want to go and see this? Until later, like I said, I processed it and said, why in the world would a surviving family member want to see the traffic video of their immolation of their family in a fiery car crash? You wouldn't. Nobody would want to see that. Am I a little bitch boy because I won't watch it? No. I give myself love and respect and say, that doesn't have to be part of my life. That doesn't make me tougher to stare at these guys pretending to be. In fact, one of the dudes, and I won't go into any detail, but one of the dudes in that movie is a rich, I got to be gentle with my words here, motherfucker who, man, I'm definitely crossing lines here, but I feel contempt. I feel deep contempt because this person represented my friend, my brother, who led the mission to the Chinook and said, "Come on, you sons of bitches, we're going to get them." Before everybody was dead, before Marcus's friends were all dead on the ground, in the Spec Recon platoon, which I would have been leading if I'd been back at the team that day instead of Mike. And I might have made a better decision. It goes back to Buds, like we talked about. Oh, see, everything connects.
Yeah.
If I'd been at the team, if I hadn't gone back to DC to be the terrorist guy, I would have been at the team. I might have had that mission. I might have been on that hillside. I might have been leading Axe and Marcus and the guys, those 4 men in that platoon, in that little squad. I might have made a different decision about the Shepherds, and there might not have been a compromise. And there wouldn't have been the deaths. Mike got the Medal of Honor, and we could all give a shit. It's a very important thing. I don't mean to this is such a nuanced thing. I'd rather have Mike back. So the Medal of Honor is, rah, rah, rah. It's cool. But it's nothing compared to the person that we lost, and we need back. And so we all learn from that. We grow from it. But I lied about so many injuries to my heart and my mind and my body. And I don't regret that either. That's, like I said earlier, every moment is instrumental. Every moment is part of what makes me the person that can help somebody today. And I'll sacrifice everything to help one person. If one little girl doesn't die because of my life, that's a good life.
I feel like when we step into this world of personal development, from wherever angle we come from, and whatever the motivations to get us there, we end up talking from our healing. And I love that. And I think we get to do that. I get to share my victory story. You get to share your healing story. And we share the mess lightly sometimes. We share, and now I've had to unpack this, and now I've been in recovery for this long. And I love this podcast because I love that I get to actually also share the reality, which is that there are still things that hurt. There are still things that we miss. There's still people that we miss. There are still things that we do not necessarily regret, but have to grieve for and have to feel all of the feelings around.
That's the key. That's exactly what I'm on about. It is the processing that is still essential. There's, in the book Untethered Soul, Singer talks about samskara, Buddhist concept of unresolved experience. And he's not just talking about boo-boos like, yeah, my girlfriend cheated on me. He's talking about joys that you didn't process because you didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
Which is deserving. Yes, I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve the good thing. I didn't deserve that compliment. I didn't deserve that. One of my buddies, one of my SEAL Team 6 buddies back in the day when I was becoming public, he's like, dude, you got to stop being a dick to these people that are trying to admire you. You're taking that away from them. They walk up and they say, "Oh, wow, Navy SEAL, man." And I would always dismiss it like, all jobs are important, then because I don't deserve it.
Yeah.
And I still don't deserve it in the sense of entitlement. I don't believe that for a second. I don't deserve, hey, you should praise me because I did some hard shit. There's a lot of people that have done harder shit than I have. The guy that cut his arm off under a boulder and walked back to civilization. Yeah, that's tougher than anything I've ever done. Every woman that's ever had a baby has done something harder than I've done with my entire the totality of my experience of life can't compare to one childbirth. It's harder, and they walk into it willingly. Like, yeah, I'm doing it. I know. I think there's a thing I call mommy memory where a woman can actually have a baby and then within less than a year think it's a good idea to do it again.
It baffles me. Like, I'm like, and I obviously haven't had children, and I'm like, do you not remember the thing that? No?
Yeah, but okay. It's a selective amnesia.
Sure.
Like, that most horrible thing in the world is something I'd like to do it again.
Yes, please sign me up.
But I thank God we have that in our DNA because there would be no us if men were in charge of childbirth, there wouldn't be any babies, and then we would have died about 20,000 years ago.
So true.
But the idea of the sacrifice, the idea of the brokenness, the idea of the processing, that's what I was talking about with my physical stuff. So there's layers upon layers of consequential effects. When I snapped my ankle on that first jump ever, it created an effect. Obviously, my structure is compromised. My structure has now been modified. There's now scar tissue on the ligaments and the connective tissues, even though there wasn't a break in the bone because my bones have never broken for some bizarre reason. I now had a non-treated serious injury, and it's on my foot. It's on my right ankle at the time. And that affects every bone in my body because the old children's song tells me so. The foot bone's connected to the ankle bone, right? Yes. And then ankle bone's connected to the shin bone. And you can't not have a connection. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I've been practicing jiu-jitsu my whole life, and I've been breaking or training to break human beings, human bodies. And I know about progressive locking. I can control a person's entire body with one finger because of the rotation of that. Lock those three little phalanges to make it one physical bit, then twist a little farther to the stopping point of the hand, and then twist the hand to the stopping point of the wrist, and the wrist to the elbow, all the way we call it the broomstick. I just twist one finger until your arm is immovably fixed in one position because each of the joints has gone to the last millimeter of its motion. Now, I know these things are all connected, but I lied about it for a good 20 years. I didn't talk about my semi-broken ankle. I had to talk about my broken neck because I couldn't feel my left arm. So that was a significant factor.
That's a problem.
I went to the doc and said, dude, look, I can stab myself in the arm. He's like, stop doing that. And what's going on? Yeah. Right. So they turned out I had a disc herniation in my neck, and they had to cut out that disc from my throat, through my throat, and put in bone they cut out from my left hip. These are all compounding effects, and each one affects every other one. It's compound interest, if you will, on boo-boos. And so my bad ankle, my bad hip, my bad neck, my torn rotator cuff, my shoulder was all shredded. I had to have that put back together. Now my left shoulder's starting to tear apart from all the wear and tear. And until I acknowledged that these things have hurt, I wasn't able to deal with the next thing that it caused. I wasn't able to trace either backward or forward through the chain of injuries, which are also true in the emotional mental realm. The chain of wounds, I couldn't see the source. Like, we got the asshole. Everybody has that asshole they know. Oh yeah, he's a mean jerk. Why is he a mean jerk?
Sure.
What pain is he covering?
Yes.
And your world is all about finding and helping heal those.
And I feel like it's somehow easier for people to graduate out of these sort of military teams and then go, oh yeah, that was injured. And I actually love that we are now talking much more about, and my emotions were injured. There was a psycho-emotional injury that also occurred and continued to occur. And I had to become a different person. Like, yes, it may have been a calling out of me to join this team or this special ops mission or whatever it is. And I had to, in order to do that, suppress so much of various elements of myself and my humanity. And on the other side, I mean, I don't know what you were told when you left eventually, or left certainly the SEAL teams, but I know some military people who were told, don't talk about it, please, because your civilian friends, spouse, family, they have no concept. Please don't talk about it. And that, again, suppressing the reality and saying, all of those feelings that you felt, don't feel them. Like, just choose to, like, maybe hide them somewhere.
Yeah.
And suffocation is the thing that comes to mind.
Well, no addiction specialist in the medical community can help a drunk like another drunk. It's the knowing, not the learning. It's the knowing. It's the living it viscerally, the experience of being a drunk. I can tell another guy, hey, I did that. I felt like that. I survived it. Here's how. And he's like, now I have hope. As compared to trusting one more shrink to go to the right book and find the right passage and paragraph to quote to me that I will never learn from. The same thing is true from the experience of combat or other trauma. In fact, in the big book of my recovery program, there's a analogy to survivors of a shipwreck. It says, no one can understand like those people. We might have been on different decks when the ship wrecked. When the Titanic crashed, or when the Titanic went down, there were people like that guy that put on the women's clothing and tried to get in the raft to get ahead of the women and children, that scumbag. That he was a rich hoity-toity dude, and he was on one deck, and there were the servants on the bottom decks, and all of them were making for the survival, and they all survived together. They didn't die, and they had no barriers between them. Afterward, I have to imagine the survivors of that shipwreck were like the survivors of 9/11. I don't give a shit if you're a man, a woman, a lesbian, a black, a Jew, a white. I don't care what you are. You're a survivor with me.
Yeah.
And that's what the combat veteran world is all about. Nobody can understand me. So why would I talk about it with them? It's more painful to be not understood, meaning not heard, which we all crave. We crave to be heard as a human being. One of our needs. Maslow would talk about that. And if you are speaking to somebody who can't comprehend it, like you're trying to tell a 6-year-old about calculus, that kid's going to be thinking about the next cartoon really obviously. This calculus ain't in his vocabulary. You say, well, there's the sine, the cosine, still blank face, thinking about the next cartoon. No matter how much you talk about it, it can only be frustrating to the math teacher to speak calculus to a 6-year-old. The same thing is true for no fault on anybody's part, to try and talk about combat wounds or these experiences to somebody who hasn't lived it.
Yeah.
Just like the drunk to drunk. If you haven't lived it, I mean, there was a phrase back in the day in the 80s, 90s, it's a black thing. Well, that phrasing, however valid or invalid or what level of truth there is to it, is all about this identity. A person who experiences it knows it far better than a scholar of that thing.
100%.
And so a lot of veterans just won't speak because they feel more pain from it being impossible for another person to hear them. But you talk to a vet, then they won't shut up. Like Saving Private Ryan, a lot of the WW2 guys were just like, they were cracked open by that. Guys had spent decades in alcoholism and anger and sullenness and solitude, isolation, not solitude. I'm very solitary, but I'm mindful of crossing the line into isolation.
Sure. And you're so right. And it's something I teach to my students. It's very much like, it's not just scope of practice, but it's diversity of origin story will absolutely dramatically impact your ability to support. And it doesn't mean that I couldn't support in some way somebody who's been through combat. I could. And I also know that shared bond of having done something similar has a whole nother layer of benefit that I simply can't provide and wouldn't even dream of presuming to. And that, I think, again, in the kind of life coaching world that we inhabit, although we both hate the term, there is this sort of sense that you can't do everything just because you think you can. And right. I can comprehend enough as a theory, but I have no physiological map of knowing what it feels like to be in those sorts of situations. And without that, I cannot relate. I can empathize. I can have so much compassion, but I can't have any concept of what you're describing when you say, and this is how it felt when I experienced that specific thing. Even just to whiz back to what you first said about giving us your 5 and 25. I was kind of putting myself in the perspective of, okay, I've opened the door on my Humvee and I've got to check within 5 meters to see any disruption of earth, to understand whether there's an aid. I'm like, I've never had to do that. The amount I've had to look outside my car door has been, can I safely get out? Am I about to knock over somebody on a bicycle?
Yeah. And when I dent my door on that pole.
Right. Which I have done, by the way. That's always a rookie move. But that level of paying attention to your environment is the very thing we try to untrain our clients in from a hypervigilance perspective.
Right.
And yet it's the very thing that as a SEAL, you were trained to have. And so that reintegration back into society, I personally don't ever think it will ever change and be fully like you're back to civilian landscape, because your nervous system has been given that open door to, hang on a second, we need to check for all of these various things.
A second nature.
I would love to have your, like, what is life
like for you? Do you feel like closer to SEAL level observationals? Are you back in civilian? Do you have any concept of what that even is? How do you experience the world? What's your orientation to it now?
I've learned a lot in very recent years and in the years before these very recent years. And it's evolutionary stages of understanding myself and the world. And in fact, something I want to wind back to briefly is that we're talking about having to suffer, needing to suffer to cross this line to become the person who is ready for the bad guy. It's what I do in red teaming. Red teaming is a mental, emotional process. Red teaming is misunderstood by many people because depending on what their industry is, if they're a computer security person, internet security, they'll say, oh, red teaming is where you try to hack into another system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fundamentally, that's true because it's emulation of the adversary. That's what red teaming is becoming the enemy. And I've done it as a terrorist, as a mafiosa, as a cyber hacker. I've done it in all different incarnations, whatever the threat was my client had to face. But getting to the right level of that, being ready to really defend against the real threats, requires a level of investment and sacrifice that, if you will, not an amateur, but a casual participant would never be effective in doing. There's Dave Grossman wrote a book called On Killing, and he talks about sheepdogs. The sheepdogs are the soldiers and the cops and all the people that protect the flock. And I acknowledge and I accept that term, the concept of the sheepdog or the blue forces. We talk about blue forces and red forces and opposition forces, the bad guys. I'm a red teamer. I'm a bad guy attacking the blue forces. I have to go into this different mindset to become the guy that's willing to do it. I had guys in my prisoner of war school that were trainers, and these are all GIs. They're U.S. military personnel dressed as, in my case, Soviets back in the day, or jihadis, or whoever the enemy of the generation is. They're dressed as them, and they speak as them, and they act as them. And I was astounded when I processed it in my prisoner of war school, and I saw a terrorist or an enemy stomping on the American flag in the mud. Because when I processed it, I realized these people that I've hated during my incarceration and my torture, I was beaten and they did interesting things to me, like we do to prepare SEALs and spies. We have to do harsh stuff to them to give them a little sampler of what the real bad guys are going to do if you ever get captured.
Yeah.
But I realized these are not people that I contempt like I did when they were abusing me. These are super patriots. Because it's very strange that I even get emotional about it, but to imagine standing on an American flag in the mud, it just hurts me really badly. And I think, fuck, man, these guys and girls, wow, way to go. Thank you so much for sacrificing that. You stabbed yourself in the heart so I won't die. Because I have to believe you that you're a horrible, wicked, terrible person so that I can prepare myself to resist you. And I use that example, and then you should see, man, they were just, when the flag came up and we were liberated at the end of prisoner of war school, those same people that had been my enemies, heavy shit, because they were saluting, they were emotional, they were relieved to be free of that pain, the agony of having to be this horrible person. Well, to be a red teamer that I started doing over 20 years ago, I have had to sacrifice. I've had to mistreat, abuse, harm myself. Psychologically, that took the form of watching beheading videos, live, real, existing people becoming dead with their throats cut out and their heads cut off, or impalements, because I immersed myself in the world of our enemies so that I could be them. So the blue forces, the good guys, the Boy Scouts of the security world I never, ever intend to dismiss or demean those people. I thank God for soldiers and cops and those who protect us. They're keeping my baby girl alive. They're part of the system that saves my children from future harm. I thank God for that. However, the blue forces, the actual checklist security folks, can never do what I do as a red teamer. All these are the sheepdogs that protect the flock. I, as a red teamer, am a reformed wolf. And only a scumbag can understand what a scumbag can do. And only a person who's actually gone willingly into the place of thinking about these impossible things for a normal person to comprehend, like the impalement of children, like the evisceration of children, like the crucifixion of children, which was done by ISIS. They crucified little girls in their Sunday dresses. That's not something that a regular security practitioner can fathom. And therefore, it's not going to get the job done of predicting what the actual adversary is going to do. There's two levels there. The sheepdogs are essential. My job as a red teamer, as a reformed wolf, begins at the end of their job. The checklists are done, the fences are built, the pop-up barriers are in place, the ID card policy is being checked, it's all established. Now, are you all done? I say, are you all done? Okay, you got it. Is this base safe? All right, here I fucking come. Because I'm going to find it. I'm going to find the gaps and I'm going to eviscerate the children. I did that at a base I can't name because it's classified. At a U.S. base in the U.S., I developed a scenario based on existing vulnerabilities wherein I would take a very small cell of terrorists who wanted media exposure and great shock value. The governor's school of that state went to that little kid's school. They were, I believe, third graders, fourth graders. And I developed a scenario in which these 4 or 5 attackers would come in and they would obscure the windows with their backpacks. They had black paint, obscure the windows and chain the doors so they control all access to the building, which was done very quickly. It could all be completed in 90 seconds. And all the kids are now faced with the teachers in the little classrooms are facing guns and they're being herded to the gymnasium area. And in that gymnasium area, they're being chained together with demolition cord and little explosive devices hung on the children's necks and grape shot charges hung on the basketball nets. And I wouldn't talk about all this publicly because it could be motivating. I mean, not motivating. It's not going to motivate a bad guy, but a bad guy could copy it. Copycatting could say, oh, great TTP, tactic, techniques, and procedures. But that exact scenario that I had the commander putting his face in his hands after I briefed it and said, this can happen today, sir. You want this to happen? No. Here's how you stop it. I provide the mitigating opportunities, but no good guy can ever think of that. It takes a scumbag, it takes a bad guy to think of it. Those becoming the scumbag, well, I had a pretty good head start as an active alcoholic criminal from before, but I just stacked on top of that with these unthinkable things, these atrocities, being willing. Like bin Laden, for example, praised one of his son's weddings. He took the mic and said, wasn't it beautiful about the coal bombing in Yemen and how there were body parts floating in the water? This is not the kind of things that people talk about at weddings, but he got a standing O for that. So only somebody who can go to that level of damage, mental, emotional damage, like I did to myself, is ready to stop that bad guy. And so it's a sacrifice, like Hell Week. It's a thing that a person needs to do or take. I'm not trying to glorify myself and others in this line of work. Take any neurosurgeon, Ben Carson, sacrificed incredible amounts of sleep and playtime with his buddies going out and getting drunk. He chose to become Ben Carson, the neurosurgeon, and he had a book written about him. Amazing life sacrifice. That person did that while I was getting drunk. I mean, I wasn't doing the Ben Carson path. I was getting drunk and having a good time. He sacrificed. So the more we sacrifice of ourselves, the more valuable we can give without abandoning. There's the critical difference, not abandoning the self, but sacrificing for a greater purpose. And that's a long, circuitous route to explain what my effects of being a SEAL are, what the benefits are as I have done this, a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice. And then self-abuse, again, self-abandonment because of my other issues, my stuff that goes way back and trauma. Okay, the cat just knocked over my fountain pen, so thank you, cat. That's it sounds like I'm being attacked by terrorists. It's just a little black cat.
Um, very cute little black cat, by the way.
It is a cute little. Her name is Rosie, beautiful little kitty cat, and she just loves her mischief. So we there's benefit to the harm. I was in a car some 10 years ago after I retired, and I was kind of hovering on against the exit lane. So the off ramp of this highway I'd driven 10,000 times, I had to decelerate rapidly to go from 55 down to 30 down to 10, and I was kind of hovering alongside the exit lanes to my right. There was no gap because they'd all backed up fast. So I'm on an active highway now, decelerating to almost zero, rolling along looking for a gap. And I was, we're all just commuters doing our thing. And I was like, okay, where's the gap? Where's the gap? And then I heard from behind me this very urgent air horn from a tractor trailer. And I heard it approaching very rapidly. The guy was literally hanging on his horn. As it came, and I glanced in the rearview mirror, saw what was happening. He was coming down fast, like 50 miles an hour. I was doing 10, and he was coming straight at me. And there's traffic on the left. He couldn't jump left, and there's nothing in the right except this almost stopped traffic. I assessed instantly, and I say this, I want to phrase it carefully. I didn't do a Rob's amazing thing. My training did a thing for me. My training, like Jason Bourne, assessed, okay, in a flick of an instant, I saw the thing barreling down on me. I had about 3 seconds before he rolls over me, before he erases my existence as a roaring tractor trailer coming down fast. I glanced right, assessed the gap, and jerked the wheel and shot into the gap with about 6 inches fore and 6 inches aft of my vehicle. And I just flowed at their speed. Instantly, I flowed into their speed. And I was rolling with it, just going on the off ramp like it was another ordinary day. And the trucker was still hanging on his horn as he roared past, going, wow. And I was calm. I was whatever. I glanced at my rearview mirror, and the guy driving the car behind me had eyes as big as $50. He was like, holy shit, what just happened in front of my very eyes? That's impossible. And that was one of the consequences of the preparation for me. Now, I mentioned Jason Bourne, but I'm not the guy that's walking around saying, okay, that guy over there has a penknife in his pocket, and these other 75 people I've assessed, and they're all, she's 25 and that guy's a terrorist, and this guy, I don't do that when I walk into a cafe. But I do always take the wall. I always take the wall because I'm vigilant, and I'm very careful about that nuance of vigilance to hypervigilance, because my PTSD makes me hypervigilant. I have been terrified, agitated to almost terror in a department store in a little girl's section when I was out with my lady shopping for little girl's clothes for her baby girl. And I was approached in one step at a time by this mommy and her little girls who were just browsing the same rack I happened to be standing on, looking at my iPhone. And I saw them creeping toward me. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at little girl clothes, and they were just creeping one step at a time toward me. And I said, I'm moving. And I moved out of their way, and I went to another place. Now, a few minutes later, they went to that rack, and they're creeping toward me. And a mommy and two little girls made me feel, they didn't make me feel, I felt about them. I felt anxiety to a level of anger. Like, what the fuck are you doing? What are you trying to do to me? Are you just creeping up on me? Like Major Payne from the Major Payne movie, which is funny as hell. I recommend it to anybody. Are you plotting on me? But they weren't plotting on me. I have the same agitation oftentimes on the highway. If someone flanks me on the quarter, rear panel, left or right, I will become angry. It's a reaction, and I'm evolving away from that. I'm growing out of it and saying, dude, that's not. And they're not setting themselves up to kill me. That's not what this is. But I have to think it consciously, because my programming is not my programming says something else. They're getting ready to hurt me.
Well, the healthiest thing for you for a long time was to assume that people flanking you or creeping towards you were coming to hurt you. So
exactly. It was functional then, and it's dysfunctional now because it's not relevant to the context.
Mm.
So I'm in the middle of that. I'm not Jason Bourne assessing every person in the room and he's looking at me, or he's pointedly looking away from me or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I'm also never going to sit with my back to the window unless this is how the level goes. These are levels of, it's nuanced again. I will consciously sit with my back to a window in a cafe. And like my lady Amy knows that I, she and the family always give me the wall because it's good for them. If something bad happens, I'm on it. I'm ready to go because of my habitual nature of observing the environment while I enjoy a conversation, while we talk about PTA meetings. Life is a combination of things. And I can also sit with my back to the window as a conscious choice that people don't seem to understand because it's a rare breed that is thinking about this. But I'm watching my table mates' eyes. I'm reading their eyes, and I just am consciously looking at them, looking at me, talking about PTA meetings, because I know if their eyes suddenly flick to the left or the right with a shocked expression, it's time for me to turn around and respond.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because when I look at what you do now, and I look at the Impact Actual, and then I look at the red teaming, it's like your actual input into the world now is that bridge. It's the whole spectrum between having to emulate the bad guy. And I would say that rather than be the bad guy, because that's just my need for, recognizing you emulating and not becoming, but, taking the position of, and also taking the opportunity to empower and allow people to find themselves within whatever their potential is. And I feel like it's come to me several times during this conversation that it's common for people, and it's not a very British thing. So it's very odd for me to be in America where people will walk past people in any kind of service outfit type, in the military outfit sort of thing, and they will say to them, "Thank you for your service." And we don't do that in the UK particularly. But what I feel when I listen to your story is that thank you for your service shouldn't stop when you left the SEAL teams and when you stopped serving there. It's almost like I kind of want to say thank you for your service now, for your service to veterans and talking about this openly, writing books, making sure it's spoken about, making sure your feelings about the shame or hiding or whatever we were doing in terms of keeping things secret. Thank you for talking about that so that your compatriots, the people who have been through similar experiences, feel like they can talk about it. But also thank you for emulating these bad people, these scumbags. And thank you for stepping into that, reformed wolf role, or, it takes a special person to be able to go to the dark side and not lose themselves there. It takes an exceptional person to spend some of their time in complete dark side, envisioning the worst of humanity, and also have a business which still believes in the best of humanity.
Yeah, there's an interesting disconnect, isn't there? It seems like there's a disconnect. But there's not really, like you said, because of the commitment. Again, back to the commit to growth. There's a commitment that's inherent in both parts of it. And I actually apply my red teaming policies to our whole person development. I tell people directly, we have, as I mentioned, the 12 tasks earlier. So commit to growth, build your body, mold your mind, etc., through the 5 powers. The second 6 spell the acronym CHOOSE. So 7 through 12. Include clarify your condition so you understand where you're coming from, and highlight your gaps is the H of choose. Highlight your gaps is directly from my red teaming work.
Sure.
I would do it when I do a facility. If I'm looking at a U.S. base or a big corporation, a compound, I will use a method I just call soft eyes. I don't know if it comes from my jiu-jitsu experience or what, but I found that things can be perceived if I relax my mind and let them be perceived, let them be seen. Gaps. The gaps are discovered. I would probe a base. I'd kind of drive around casually, relaxed, looking around. I'd go running the base. I'll jog the base and find places a bad guy could compromise, could exploit. The same thing is true with us. We have to highlight our gaps, and it's a deep dive. That phase of the Unchained program, Impact Unchained, is 6 weeks based on that second 6 tasks, the choose format. Clarify your condition, highlight your gaps, observe your arena, orient your options, and select your force and execute your mission. So those 6 tasks are the foundation of the 6 weeks of the Unchained course. and highlighting your gaps, getting honest. The fifth step. Fourth step is searching and fearless moral inventory from my recovery program. The fifth step is sharing that and coming clean. You probably heard the phrase that I've heard so much in my recovery is you're only as sick as your secrets. When we are holding things inside that should be shared or let go of, the samskara, the old wounds that we just cling to. Like I use the example, having been cheated on a couple of times by some real pros, I can tell you that, there's few things are as painful as that emotional betrayal of a partner, which of course, almost every adult listening has experienced. So I'm not trying to put myself in a special camp, but that pain, that experience of pain can be rammed down. And Singer talks about in The Untethered Soul, he says these samskaras, these wounds that aren't processed, are no different from a thorn. It sits in the skin, the tissue, and it abscesses, and it affects your behavior. Your daily behavior is affected by this fear. What if I get betrayed again? And believe me, on this date in 2022, I'm still wrestling with that, and it still affects my relationships, and that still affects the person most important to me in the world. And I am constantly acknowledging that I have to deal with this, not for her or whoever the her is. If I have different situations in the past as I have in the future, whoever that person is, that if I love someone, I must take the actions to work on me, but I don't change me for them. I change me for me. I've got to work on this, not because it makes some lady's life easier, but because I deserve better. I deserve to live free of those attachments. And as recently as, this week and last week and in recent years and months, I've been releasing myself from old stuck points, old samskaras, old things that had to be processed out. And the key that Singer talks about in those samskaras, these old wounds or old experiences that aren't processed, is that you got to feel it. It's going to be felt as it comes out of you, bubbles out of you. The pain experience of that. What if you see a red Corvette and the guy that took your girls drove a red Corvette? Well, you have pain every time. Is that necessary? No.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I need to feel pain 1,000 times over the next 10 years because I see a red Corvette? No. Let it go. And that's the gift to me. I deserve it. And that took a lot of growth to recognize that I deserve to live free.
And it feels very strongly in the conversations that we've had that you have really dedicated your commitment pillar of thought process to your own personal evolution now. And I suppose now, but always, but also this healing part of it, this, unconnecting to those patterns, those defaults, those knee-jerk triggers, and actually realizing them for what they are and recognizing that they're emanations from within you and going, well, I don't actually want to have that happen. Therefore, I'm going to be committed to the process of resolution that begins with the feeling that you've spoken about.
And I recognize that I will not be a good partner until I'm a good individual. No, not qualifying moral judgment on good and bad here, just saying healthy. I had a counselor one time who told me about relationships. He said, it's not a addition process, it's a multiplication. He says, if you take 200% people, 1.0 units of people, and you multiply them, you don't end up with a 3.0. You have a 1.0 whole relationship. But if you take 2 half people who are looking for completion in somebody else, if they're 50% or 0.5 each, you multiply 2.5s, you get a 0.25 relationship, a quarter of what it could be at its full potential. That kind of concept is so important to me to realize, as we talk about an impact all the time, it is all about you. It is all about you. It's all about you. It's you. It's not all about what you can get from the world and from the people around you. It's not about being served coffee and being treated like a king. It's all about you in the sense that there's nothing else I can control in the world, and everything that is good or bad is a consequence of my choices. We say choose your change because change is going to happen. What are you going to choose? You can be apathetic and make a choice to not choose. Guess what? Consequences will come from that. You can be proactive and make a choice to, like I do every morning. I develop myself. I focus on the 4 powers of body, mind, heart, and soul. I focus on them consciously. Say, what? Every day I read 20 pages of a good book, and I give myself points for it in my little tracker. I've got a little tracker. And those disciplines build on each other. I play 2 or 3 minutes of guitar, and I make massive headway after having carried the guitar for 20 years, but waiting for that perfect week when I had 1 hour to train on it.
Right.
Those little things add up. If I focus on the disciplines of my mind and my body and my heart, if I focus on physical, mental, emotional, and the spiritual, ethical, if I focus on them as something I can train, another one of our impact rules is TDAA, train daily, align always. The alignment, like we talked about, always accept, never settle. Train daily, align always is a refreshing liberation from the rah, go get him, you got to hustle till you puke teachings of success / leadership today. I'll use Gary Vee as an example. Gary Vee could own me 10 times over if he wanted to destroy me in court for mentioning his name. I'm not, if you hear this, Gary, which you never will.
Excuse me, Gary listens to my podcast. What are you talking about, Rob?
Gary Vaynerchuk is, if he hears it through friends, I'm not talking bad about you, but one of his major things is hustle. Never stop. Just keep, sharks got to swim to eat. That's true. However, we also have to have a break. We also have to have a rest. The natural human cycle, like any natural human cycle of agriculture or the economy or physical fitness, includes essential rest. That sabbatical has to happen. The Sabbath of a break. Once a week, I take a day. Once a month, I take a weekend. Once a year, I take a quarter. I take, a week. So these cycles of rest and effort are essential. And we're being taught to rah, drive on. And we're killing ourselves, and we're killing our families, and we're killing our society.
And that's why I love that the technically someone who could be called a rah, like ex-Navy SEAL person, wrote a book about peace.
Yeah, and about rest.
And
you have to rest.
And
train daily, align always, like the rah we hear. Doesn't matter. I don't care I don't care how. One thing I really hate to hear is fuck your feelings. That is an expression that has been used in recent years. In my opinion, most often by people whose feelings are the most delicate. The people that are screaming snowflakes at other people are the ones who are the most fragile and delicate and little fluttery flowers who will collapse at the first sign of resistance or opposition or debate, or they just lose their shit. They lose their mind because they have no substance. I've heard, and I'm using bad words here, I've heard that swearing and screaming is the proof you have no foundation, no argument, no validity to your argument. You're just going to scream and try to overwhelm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think screaming is definitely the proof that you have no argument. But I also heard that more intelligent people use more swear words and more emojis.
Fuck yes.
So I'm like, I'm signing myself up for that one.
I'm going to go with that. Like the clutter. An organized desk is a sign of a sick mind.
There's something about like writing something down and putting an emoji that like clarifies the point of the sentence. Because sometimes in written, I'm all for the emoji usage. I'm like, this is just how I
use them very frequently. Yeah. It's a fun way to communicate.
We're clearly both really intelligent. Yeah.
Very intelligent.
Oh, Rob, this has been such a delight. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your time with this random British girl who just went, "Can I do a podcast with you?" And you.
Well, I just want to listen to you talk. That's all. We got to get another hour. You can read like you can read the encyclopedia or something.
Very sweet, and also I find such inspiration in your story because in a life that could have gone any way, you have chosen to completely commit every single time and recommit and completely throw yourself into service of all descriptions and all types. And I think you're a phenomenal example to so many different groups of individuals. So thank you so much.
It's as I've told people when they do thank me for my service, I say it's always been a privilege. It literally is, because as you identified, it doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Whether I walked into the service with a sense of service or it was inculcated during the service, I can't not. I see my life as being a process of contribution for the rest of my life, and that serves me. They say it's better to give than to receive. I'm not saying I'm doing this because I am a Mother Teresa. I'm saying I do it because it's very, very satisfying to me. It's very fulfilling to me to be able to make a difference in other people's lives. That drives me. And that goes even uncomfortably into people pleasing, an old tradition of mine, and, entanglements and codependence. And I thank God I'm aware of that, because once you see it, you can deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm aware of those things, and I keep it on this side of the line, on the healthy side of contribution, as compared to self-abandonment of saying, well, I got to make other people happy because I don't deserve it. Well, I do deserve it.
And so now that all of my listeners are completely in love with you and your acronyms and like want to find out all the letters in your alphabet soup of
well, the main one is DBAD, don't be a dick.
Right. But where can we find out more about Impact Actual and all of the things? Where would you like to direct my listeners today?
Well, Impact Actual, 2 words, impactactual.com is where everything resides. All of our stuff is right there. I love for people to find me at any social as Rob DuBois. That's 7 or 9 letters. ROBDUB, capital B, OIS.
I wondered if it was
the capital B is important. Yeah, capital B.
I wondered.
It looks like Rob DuBois, but I hate to hear that. And I've heard every other variation, like DuBois and 2 boys and devious and Dubois.
Well, this is because you named your first company some weird variation of it.
Some
you basically
horrible,
asked for this.
horrible word. Yeah. I deserve it. I deserve this. So it's just ROBDUBOIS
we will
at
tag
Instagram
all
and
of this in the show notes and make sure that people can find you and I also am going to link to all of your books and everything, because I feel like my listeners are going to be like on a Rob DuBois deep dive.
Oh, I appreciate it. Anything we can to open the conversation is priceless to me. That's what I live for. And when I see people having breakthroughs, I am pleased by it. Not because I live vicariously through others, but because I know that the meaning in my life, if I can inspire some new thought, is everything. I'll wrap here, but I wrote a column for a couple of years from a local newspaper called For Goodness Sake. It was a play on words for the goodness I saw in Afghanistan, the goodness I saw in Iraq, the goodness I saw with mommies and daddies trying to get their babies safely home from school or even have a school to go to and around the world. And so I wrote this column, and my author, Rob Grogan, God rest his soul, who was the editor for Powerful Peace, a Navy SEALs Lessons on Peace from a Lifetime at War. He was the editor of my column, and he said his wife, Virginia, did layout for the thing. And he said, Rob, I got to tell you, I don't know if I was in Baghdad or Kabul or whenever he emailed me about this. He's like, I want you to know something. When Virginia does when she does the layout for the magazine, she doesn't read this stuff. That's not her job. She can't focus on every article and every content. She just makes it fit on the pages. He said, but with yours, you did something weird to her, and she reads every one. And she says, I never thought of it that way before. And that one quote from Rob about Virginia, to me, is everything to me. I don't give a shit if people like my syntax. I don't give a shit if they say, oh, your writing is so moving. I believe that my writing is excellent. I believe I'm an excellent writer, but I don't give a shit about that. I don't want to be admired for my tradecraft or my skills. I want to hear somebody say, I never thought about it that way before. And that's a massive, massive world-changing victory for me, because I know now they're going forward and doing the same to others.
Thank you so much, Rob. And for everyone listening, if you want to experience Rob's magic and to think about things in completely new ways, check out our show notes and follow all the links and learn to think differently.
So I know that many of you will now be speechless and also in awe of the service that we are provided by our military professionals, no matter what your opinion of war and violence, and those who choose to put themselves in the line of fire in the name of their country and duty and honor. I, as I said, was deeply moved by this episode, and I really hope that you are. Please check out the show notes. If you have any interest in Rob's work, go read his book and also check out Impact Actual. We will link everything in the show notes. I was also interviewed by Rob himself for his podcast, the Beyond Your Limits podcast with Rob DuBois. That will be coming out in a couple of weeks' time, so stay tuned to social media for Unveil, and we will let you know where to find that when it is live. With that, all that's left to say is thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode or believe that someone that you love or know could get value of it, please like, share, subscribe, and send to your friends.